Good morning. It is 7 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
With Sophie and Wilf, a very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
New standards on maternity care are being rolled out to try and reduce the number of women dying each year after England's top midwife admits to us care is not good enough.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps released video purportedly showing them seizing 2 foreign container ships in the Strait of Hormuz.
In Lebanon, we see the grief and the anger at the sight of a deadly Israeli strike, which hit less than an hour before the ceasefire began.
However, strikes do continue, and Israel's accused by Lebanon of war crimes in targeting journalists after the killing of Amal Khalil yesterday.
We'll also be talking, of course, about the Mandelson saga, another civil servant facing MPs today, this time from the Cabinet Office. We're going to have that live.
Victims of the Post Office capture scandal call for a new law to finally clear their names. NHS England's chief midwife has admitted the service's maternity care is not good enough, but insists the NHS is still a safe place to have a baby. However, the number of women who die during pregnancy or shortly afterwards is rising.
So, new clinical standards are being brought in, including more mental health assessments and action on blood clots as well. But of course, it remains to be seen if it will have an impact. Our health correspondent Laura Bundock spoke to Kate Brinkworth, and she started by asking her why this is still such a huge problem in 2026.
None of us think that care is in the right place. We don't think that things are good enough, but we are starting to see improvements in safety with all the packages of care that we have put in.
What would you say to a pregnant woman right now who might have been watching the news, reading the headlines, and might feel very frightened about giving birth in an NHS hospital at the moment?
So I spend a lot of time visiting services all around the country, and the thing that unifies them is a sense of restlessness about what is happening in maternity. Every midwife, every obstetrician comes to work because they want a good outcome for the women in front of them. So yes, the NHS is a safe place to have a baby, and I would always urge women, talk to your midwife, talk to your doctor.
We've spoken to a lot of families who've lost babies, and they tell us how they are fighting multiple organisations just to get basic answers.
It's a terrible anguish to lose a child. I think it is one of the worst things that can happen to a human, and our responsibility as leaders in maternity is to make sure that those families do not experience that anguish. It's why we've asked services to look at their bereavement care in great detail, in huge detail, to make sure that families receive the care they need.
We've received recently hundreds and hundreds of emails from women saying a very similar thing, that when it comes to their midwife, they felt ignored.
Being listened to is the most important thing to every woman having a baby. She has the absolute right to be at the centre of her own care, to have her concerns taken seriously. For me, as a practising clinical midwife, if I don't listen to the woman in front of me, then I'm not doing my job properly.
Laura Bundock there, and more to come from that exclusive interview later in the day on Sky News. Sophie, this is obviously a topic you in particular have focused on quite a lot. Remind everyone where we are with it, because every time you get either an interview or more statistics pointing to it, you're reminded of how utterly shocking it is. The government is looking at it, but we haven't obviously got the action yet to solve the problems.
Yeah, look, there's a review going on, the Amos review, and there's been criticism that we don't need another review because we already know what's wrong with it. So I think today this is probably an attempt by the government to show that they're not just waiting for the outcome of the review, they want to take some action now to try and change things. I think it is actually quite positive that we've got the chief midwife out there doing an interview, which I'll be honest does not happen very often, not for want of trying by journalists. So I think that in terms of the culture and people taking accountability, I think this is a step forward, perhaps as well. But like you say, Wolf, it's just worth dwelling on the data, because the number of maternal deaths, this is mums dying, right, giving birth, trying to bring life into the world. is up 20%. It's extraordinary. So 252 maternal deaths from 2022 to 2024, 20% higher than the rate from 10 years ago. That's an equivalent of 12.8 deaths for every 100,000 women giving birth. It is shocking, I'll be honest, 2026, that we are at this level. And, you know, you just got to hope that finally something changes.
As we said, more to come from that interview. Of course, one of the lines she did say, the NHS is a safe place to have a baby, ultimately. Important to shine a spotlight, though, on those cases where it hasn't been, even if it's not the case for all. More to come on that later. If you have been affected by the issues discussed there and would like to share your story with us, please do get in touch. You can email maternitystories@sky.uk, maternitystories@sky.uk.
Let's go to the Middle East now, because Iranian state TV has broadcast some pretty dramatic footage of Iranian forces seizing foreign-flagged vessels in the Strait of Hormuz.
It was released after Iran targeted 3 more ships over the past 24 hours. A speedboat is seen pulling up next to a Liberian-flagged container ship before armed men with their faces covered climb a ladder to take control of the vessel.
So Iran has said that it fired on 3 ships in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday and seized 2 after Donald Trump extended the ceasefire. Look, tensions evidently remain very high because the US is maintaining its blockade of Iranian ports, and that has led to Iran effectively closing the passage as well.
It is really interesting just to pause and look at the market reaction to the last couple of days. So oil's up another % today. It's up at 103 for Brent. So, you know, just to state the obvious, back above 100. Unsurprising, you would say, because clearly the peace talks haven't taken place and clearly there is seizing of ships there in the Strait, albeit commercial ones. The sort of positive side of all of this is that the ceasefire has been extended. So even though we're not reopening the Strait, clearly missiles aren't being fired again. That's the sort of plus side versus the negative side. Amazingly enough, you know, the US stock market again closed at a record all-time high. So if you're looking at stocks, very much focused on that little positive that you could focus on, that there's a ceasefire being extended. You look at oil, it's focusing on the fundamental reality that the Strait of Hormuz remains shut.
Yeah.
With us all being reminded in the last couple of weeks how hard it will be to reach an agreement to reopen it. It is somewhat baffling, I think, to see oil back above 100 and stocks nonetheless being at all-time highs. But that's where we are. Yeah,
we start to see that feed through a bit as well. Inflation, you know, being higher than expected, ticking up. We're expecting further rises as well. Jet fuel, you know, with the German airline Lufthansa cancelling 20,000 routes.
And the EU itself with a big warning on this yesterday, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. Ali Bunkle's reporting on that. So I agree. It's very starting to be tangible signs around the world. Now, Lebanon's Prime Minister has accused Israel of war crimes through the targeting of journalists after the death of one working in the south of the country.
Amal Khalil, who worked for Al Akbar, which is a Lebanese newspaper aligned with Hezbollah, had sought shelter in a house from an Israeli strike together with a colleague, but the house was then hit in a second strike, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. Well, emergency teams then recovered Khalil's colleague, Zainab Faraj, alive with injuries and transferred her to hospital. They added that a Lebanese Red Cross ambulance sent to evacuate casualties came under a stun grenade attack and live fire, at first preventing rescuers from reaching Khalil.
Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said targeting journalists, obstructing access to them by relief teams and even targeting their locations again after these teams arrive constitutes war crimes. Israel's targeting of media workers in the south while they carry out their professional duties is no longer isolated incidents, but has become an established approach that we condemn and reject, as do all international laws and conventions. Israel says it's investigating the strikes and denies targeting rescue efforts.
Well, the US is hosting a second round of talks between Lebanon and Israel in Washington today. A ceasefire was announced last week. Since then, though, both sides have accused each other of violating it. Here's our international correspondent, Diane Magnay, who has been to the site of one strike that took place less than an hour before the ceasefire was announced.
I want to tell Israel this. Our unborn children will resist them with their own teeth, because they are bloodsuckers, both the Israelis and the Americans. Not the people, It's that hysterical man that they brought to destroy the world.
You can see why she is so angry. For the 25 people killed here in an Israeli airstrike 59 minutes before the ceasefire took hold.
My nephew is still under the rubble. My brother was removed, but both of his children are gone, and my niece and his wife.
It's full of children, she says. A fisherman all his life, Hassan Hijazi shows us the scars where he was shot out at sea by Israeli forces in the late 60s and in the 1990s. Born 8 years before the State of Israel, now Israel has killed his family.
What do we have to do with Israel? We just want to protect our country and our villages. But every time you speak on it, you end up fighting with your own community. Better to stay silent.
This is Tyre's idyllic seafront. People come here to smoke shisha, to eat at Chop's Diner. Look at it now. Now huge JCBs claw up great hunks of rubble that were people's kitchens and living rooms and the place of their memories, still searching for Hijazi's nephew and one more. And it is exhausting work. One of those killed here was an 80-year-old woman, Maha Abu Khalil. Now, in her 20s, she had tried to hijack an El Al airliner in Athens airport, and she'd been jailed by Israel and finally exchanged in a prisoner swap. She had been living in one of these buildings. Now, we don't know if she was the target, but more than 50 years after that, they killed her. Do you think that they targeted this building because of your aunt?
So we don't know what they think, but they keep a grudge. They might have, because there's only civilians here. There's no warriors, no infrastructure, there's nothing. It's a building inhabited with civilians, everybody. You've been here, you've seen.
We move to another strike site nearby, again in a residential area where a journalist and 2 other civilians had been killed. When we hear an announcement of the funeral service for someone pulled from the rubble just after we'd left. It is Hassan Hijazi's nephew. Abu Dahab, he was called, father of gold because of what he would catch in the sea and the money it brought. Now laid to rest in the Lebanese flag, grief written on his uncle's face. And from there, Abu Dahab's body is rushed to burial, as quick as they can to hurry his soul towards God. These were fishermen, civilians, elderly men who had survived many of Israel's wars on their land, killed in the last hour of this one. Diana Magnay, Sky News, in Tyre, Lebanon.
We'll obviously continue our coverage of the impact of the war in Lebanon and across the Middle East throughout the programme. But just to return to politics here in Westminster, because the Prime Minister's he's already faced some pretty bruising sessions in the Commons this week over the Peter Mandelson betting scandal, and there's going to be another tricky day ahead.
The most senior civil servant at the Cabinet Office, Kat Little, will be grilled by MPs in the Foreign Affairs Select Committee later this morning. We'll have it live for you at 9:30. Rob's here to help sort of set the scene and who exactly Kat Little is, because all eyes on it. Earlier this week it was explosive testimony, but there's more to come next week as well.
Yeah, I think potentially next week might be the really big stuff when Morgan McSweeney, the former Chief of Staff, appears. Kat Little will be interesting today, but it's important to remember she's a serving civil servant, right? So she won't be able to speak quite as freely as Ollie Robbins did. The fact that she's also in place as well means that I find it unlikely that she's going to want to say anything that's going to, you know, either drop the Cabinet Office or drop the Prime Minister in it. She has been in place since 2024 as the most senior civil servant in the department of the Cabinet Office. And I guess she will get challenged on that accusation from Ollie Robbins that the Cabinet Office were basically trying to sort of railroad through the Peter Mandelson appointment, that some there didn't even think that he needed to be vetted, something that I thought was kind of tacitly confirmed by Number 10 a couple of days ago when they said, well, of course, there were conversations that went on with the Foreign Office. Peter Mandelson's a Privy Councillor, he's a Lord. So I guess you'll get pressed on that. But also, I think you will find a degree of defence coming from her that could work in favour of the Prime Minister, where she will argue that it's been very difficult to get information out of the Foreign Office. I think she will make the point about how hard it was to get hold of that vetting report. And you may well find her talking as well about what potentially was the sort of weak spot in Ollie Robbins' evidence when he said, well, this vetting report was communicated to me verbally and didn't seem too clear on whether there was sort of minutes of that, because his whole defence seems to rely on him being told, not that it was a categorical fail, do not appoint this guy, that it was more nuanced than that. I think she will probably make the point that actually when they got the piece of paper, it was pretty categorical and it was a red box for Mandelson on both counts.
So all of this, I guess, is the worst possible narrative before the local elections, of course, for the government. They're trying to get back on the front foot. They got an announcement on small boats today. What is it? Yeah, this is a kind of renewal, a new deal with France to try and tackle small boat crossings on the French side. There have been these 3-year deals that have kind of come and gone. This is the latest incarnation of that, essentially. It's more money than has been committed in the past. It's over £660 million on this 3-year deal. I think there's maybe more of a kind of, I don't know, maybe militaristic attempt to frame it by saying that UK riot-trained police officers will be going over. So I think that's maybe what makes this stand out from previous incarnations and previous deals. The other bit in this that's interesting is that a chunk of this, around £100 million of that UK funding, could be redirected or withdrawn if there aren't provable results on the French side as well. So look, I think that the hope is that you put together all these various bits, the one-in, one-out deal, some of the reforms that are being made to the asylum system, and all together that will bring down the number of boat crossings. At the moment, I checked just before I came into the studio, the numbers are 35% down on last year so far, but probably not down enough compared to the last few years for them to really be claiming any kind of victory. And importantly, numbers can go up and down, right? We're getting into the summer months. I think this is where the proof comes, whether anything that has been put into place since last summer is actually showing results.
Rob, great stuff as always. Thanks so much. Rob Powell covering, setting up the day's political discussions for us. By the way, Ed Davey will be joining us later, the head of the Liberal Democrats. That's coming up later this hour, and we'll be continuing all of the political discussion as well. We'll also be talking to Dave Penman. He's the head of the union that represents civil servants in light of Ollie Robinson's dismissal. That's coming up later on as well.
Yeah, definitely worth sticking around for that one, given the amount that civil servants have been in the news recently. Well, we're joined now by the Home Office Minister, Alex Norris, who's here with us now. Good to have you. Thank you very much for being with us. So you're here to talk about small boats. What's the announcement today?
We've made a really significant agreement with France that we'll be announcing today. Home Secretaries in northern France making that agreement in the next few hours. This is about a surge in activity to tackle small boats. So as a result of this deal, we'll see more than 40% more boots on the ground. We'll see specialist units around maritime operations, around riot squad type activity at the beaches. So real step forwards in tackling the smugglers and stopping people getting on those dangerous boats.
I'm interested that some of this money to France is kind of contingent on results. Is that a bit of an acknowledgement that maybe in certain situations in the past, France weren't, I guess, trying as hard as they could to stop migrants crossing the Channel?
No, that wouldn't be the way I'd characterise it. The deal has a core funding for things we know we're going to need come what may. It has a conditional element, which for the first time our predecessors left us with a deal where that was never the case, where there is innovation funding, where we're looking at things to see, the model changes of these smugglers. These are cynical criminals. So as those change, we'll see what works. If things don't work for the first time, they'll stop being done. So this is an important partnership with our neighbours.
So it's nothing to do with the fact that, you're trying to say it's payments on results.
Well, it needs to deliver.
It is, right?
It's the British people's money. It needs to deliver. So it's
is
right.
That because you think France hasn't, I guess, always... Isn't it more of an incentive for them to try their hardest to stop migrants crossing the Channel?
I wouldn't say, Sophie, it's about efforts, it's about impact. And those two things are different. If you're talking about an action on a beach where it could be 2 or 3 young men and women, French men and women, trying to stop whether it's real kind of riot-type conditions, that's really difficult. It's not about effort. It's about making sure we have the right tools, the right approaches, the right innovations to have the impact.
OK. I want to talk to you about maternity as well. The The statistics out today, frankly, beg a belief. 20% more mums dying in childbirth than they were like around a decade ago, more babies dying. In 2026, it is appalling, frankly. The chief midwife telling Sky News today that it's not good enough. It isn't good enough, is it?
Well, it's not. And, you know, a lot of your viewers will be people from Nottingham, from my community. We've been at the very forefront of this. Our maternity scandal, which is our review through the wonderful Donna Ockenden, is coming to its full its final stages. That is going to have some very, very upsetting conclusions to it. We know that already. We know that, you know, ours is not the only one. There are others around the country too. We know that through the national inquiry that's going on, that's going to tell us a lot too about the state of, you know, of maternity services across the country. You know, these are really awful things to read and to hear and drive us to change.
I think that, you know, it's not just a time for reviews, though, is it? And I understand there are some things that have been announced today. But don't you just need to crack on and do some big root and branch reforms about training midwives, about the quality of midwives, about one-to-one care, all of this kind of stuff? That's what will make a difference, isn't it? Why don't you just get on and do it?
Well, absolutely. But it's right that you do that based on the best possible evidence, because...
We've got all the evidence. Talk to Donna Ockenden. She's done reviews on this in the past. We know the problem. We've got the evidence. We've had hundreds of recommendations.
Well, as you know, I talk to Donna a lot. I'd never talk for Donna. I'm not brave enough to do that. But, you know, what I would say is that we ask people to do really serious bits of work. They work with affected families. It's right that we let that information come forward to give us the conclusions. Our absolute duty, what we have to do, is make sure that when those conclusions come forward, that they're acted on. You've seen some of our activity already in terms of our investment in health services, because we know staffing is definitely an element, but that, you know, I want to be clear to listeners, we accept the challenge in this area. We're as saddened as they are, and it drives us all to want change.
Could we talk about the Mandelson appointment now? We have the top civil Cabinet Office civil servant Kat Little in front of the inquiry today. Two other civil servants, Rolly Robbins, Sir Griff Wormald, have lost their jobs. Civil servants have paid a pretty heavy price for what was a political appointment, haven't they?
Well, it is right that you know, first of all, as your viewers will have seen, the Prime Minister has taken accountability and apologised for a decision that we would not have made if we had the facts that are available to us today. It is right that that process is looked at as to why we got to this situation. It is right that there's accountability within that process too. That's what people would expect to see.
I mean, you know, we've heard... There's a lot I could pick on, by the way, in that answer about, you know, having all the full facts, but I don't want to get into the... We've rehearsed the Mandelson arguments before so many times. I just want to talk about the civil servants, because, you know, we know from reports of Cabinet that several ministers raised concerns, and I know you won't comment on leaked reports, but I can as a journalist, about the way civil servants have been, I guess, treated in this, and that they worry about keeping them on side, making them feel valued. Do you share those worries?
Well, I know that every day I work with brilliant civil servants, scores of brilliant civil servants who love their country, who deal with difficult challenges. You know, look at the fruits of that today, of what we've achieved with France, which people told us we'd never be able to achieve. We, of course, want that people to work in the best morale, you know, the best support possible. I believe that's the case. I believe Britain's, you know, a brilliant country to be a member of the civil service of. I always want my constituents to be in there and others to want to too. So, no, I think we've got a great working relationship with the civil service. And again, as I say, I think we see some of the results of that.
A lot of people have lost their jobs over this. Should Keir Starmer lose his?
No. You know, the Prime Minister has been accountable. He's been there in front of Parliament. He's been very clear about what happened and why it happened. Everything he said has been borne out. Well, he's been accountable in that he has been asked to express...
What, at the Prime Minister's questions?
Well, both. But he had also more than 2 hours on Monday answering everything that he'd... that he'd been asked to answer by all parliamentarians of all parties and none, been very clear about what he knew and when. It is really important to recognise that subsequent, whether it's select committee appearances or whatnot, have borne out that sequence of events.
Should he be referred to the Privileges Committee?
Well, that will be a matter for the committee and for Parliament. I would strongly say, because the Prime Minister is ultimately accountable to Parliament and the British people, but you will have seen, as I say, more than 2 hours on Monday of scrutiny of everything he knew and when, a long debate on Tuesday, Prime Minister's question time on Wednesday, and not to forget that this has been debated previously too. You know, the Prime Minister has been held to account. And,
by a couple of PMQs and by, you know, making a statement to the House? I mean, come on. You know, look at the list of people who've lost their jobs over this.
Well, I'd say, Sophie, you know, The idea that 2.5 hours in Parliament, where every single parliamentarian got the chance to ask any possible question, to be clear that the Prime Minister had followed those rules and those very important safeguards that Parliament has, I wouldn't diminish that as just a couple of questions.
Not everyone agrees with you. Jonathan Brash, Labour MP for Hartlepool, says it's now when, not if, Keir Starmer goes. I'm completely fed up to the back teeth with the psychodrama in Westminster, the own goals. Will Keir Starmer lead Labour into the next election?
Yes. I mean, I would say to Jonathan and to others, look at what we delivered this month alone. You know, huge decreases in waiting lists, minimum wage increases, triple lock increases. In my community alone, the lift on the two-child tax credit limit will take more than 5,000 children out of poverty. That's action at the pumps, action on our energy bills. This is a government that's getting on with change, spearheaded by our Prime Minister, and we should be all pulling in that direction.
Are you frustrated by your colleagues who aren't sticking to that line that you've just given to us?
No. It's, you know, we're in a parliamentary democracy. Jonathan's my mate. Like, you know, people must say their piece. That's absolutely fine. We're you know, that's part of the political process.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Alex Norris there speaking to us from the government. Great to have you with us. Thanks very much indeed. A little bit of breaking news coming to us now from Denmark. There's been a collision of two trains that has prompted a massive emergency response. Dutch media are reporting that between 5 and 10 people have been injured in the crash, which happened just north of Copenhagen on a line linking the towns of Hillerød and Kastrup. We'll get more on that, of course, as we get it. We'll also be talking just in a few moments' time as well about the impact of the war in Iran on shipping in particular.
With respect, Minister, answer the question.
It's you. Hello and welcome, I'm Cathy Newman.
So could the outcome of these elections be manipulated?
New me, new show, new furniture. Hard news needs a hard chair. I feel like I'm in therapy.
Oh,
There's room for two on this one.
do you think people will take me seriously with my feet up?
Sorry, madam, but we're closing now.
Oh, sorry.
Sofa sorted, let's get this show on the road.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching.
Good to see you again. How are you?
Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on.
I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Welcome back. Well, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has left some seafarers effectively trapped on their own ships for now close to 2 months. The stalemate between the US and Iran has put the safety and mental well-being of those at sea at risk, especially after Iran seized 3 more vessels in the past 24 hours. Joining us now is the journalist and author Rose George, who's investigated the secret world of international shipping. Thanks so much for joining us. As we said, your book, The Deep Sea and Foreign Going Inside Shipping, the Invisible Industry That Brings You 90% of Everything. Great to have you on this topic. Let's just set things up, if we can, with the state that the sailors on these ships are likely in. I mean, do they have plentiful supplies on these sorts of boats for months at a time?
Well, first of all, let's talk about how many of them there are, because I think even a lot of coverage, even now, kind of assumes that we're talking about driverless tankers, and we're still not hearing enough about the seafarers. So we're talking about 20,000 people probably stuck on ships. Most of them do seem to have good supplies. The ITF, which is the trade union that supports seafarers, says that it's contacted about 10% of its requests are to do with poor supplies, but most of them do seem to be currently victualled, as the word is in shipping. I'm in direct contact with a seafarer who's stuck on a laden tanker and has been there for 60 days, and they are okay, but they want to get off the ship as soon as possible, and they don't want to transit the Strait of Hormuz because, as you say, the mental health implications of having been stuck on, essentially being sitting ducks, and now that shipping is being used as an instrument of war, they're all collateral damage. So the mental health impacts are just huge.
And I want to get into that in a moment. I'm sure it's unbelievably challenging for them. In terms of purely the time on ship and the supplies, if this was a more normal geopolitical situation around them, would 2 months, 60 days be kind of normal? Presumably these journeys do take that long, typically.
They do, but obviously most ships would be calling at ports. There aren't many ships that are going to do 2 months at sea without calling at a port. For example, when I was on a container ship for 5 weeks, we called at 6 or 7 ports. So each time we went ashore, we could get personal supplies, and the ship could get resupplies for example, the galley. But I mean, also consider that a lot of these tankers, they're in the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, and they're not that far from, Dubai or Qatar, wherever they are in the Gulf. They probably do have access if they have small boats that can supply them. So yes, these people who are on these ships, they are used to being at sea for many days at a time, and they will be used to supplying the ships, but this is an unprecedented situation.
And what is the mindset of the sailors as to how scared they are, how against travelling through the strait they are as things stand? We've seen in the last week some ships attempt it, some turn around, some even be intercepted. Often, which I think is part of your point at the top of this interview, we talk about the inability for the ships and the owners to get insurance to pass through. Would all of the sailors have quite a binary view on this? Absolutely not. I don't want to go through as things stand.
It's hard to say, because it's still hard to get in contact with many of them directly. I mean, from my direct line to this particular seafarer, I know that on that ship, nobody wants to go through the Strait of Hormuz. They just want to be disembarked and fly home. But I mean, there are 20,000 people there. All of these, probably a lot of them are from the global south, because shipping gets a lot of its labour from the global south. They've got families to support. They've got families that are worried about them. I don't know if they think it's a good idea to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Frankly, I wouldn't. I'd rather be repatriated. But of course, if you get repatriated, you need to bring someone in to crew the ship. So shipping managers and operators are facing those difficulties as well of how to crew these ships if they do repatriate crews. So it's a very tricky situation. But I mean, you were saying that we've been watching ships being intercepted and turning around, and it's all kind of exciting. It's quite like a video game if you're watching these marine traffic vessel tracking websites, but we have to think that how terrifying is that to be on those ships that are being boarded, that are being now, 2 of them have been seized. One of them did actually escape, one of those 3 MSC ships that were apprehended by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. But I mean, how terrifying is it? We've known this from the days of Somali piracy. Seafarers were exposed to the risk of being hostages, but this is of a different magnitude.
Just finally, in your assessment of the situation there, do you think it's highly unlikely still that these ships are going to start passing through the Strait again? Will it only be when there is a full ceasefire?
Well, every time I get up and I do what I call check the crazy, I mean, what's been done overnight, what's been done on Truth Social, what's been done, and you also see schisms within the Iranian authorities as well. Maybe the Revolutionary Guard is not on the same page as, for example, the Speaker of the Parliament. So when the Strait was declared open last Friday, immediately I was sent a recording of the Iranian Navy saying, no, it's not open, we don't agree with this. So I mean, it's just an information chaos, really. And so I'm not going to make any predictions, but I would not be hopeful for things to calm down, because we're just seeing this pretty appalling and indefensible cat and mouse game which is being played with ships and their crews.
Rose, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Just got a little bit of an update on the breaking news that we brought you just a few moments ago on the train collision that has happened in Denmark, just north of Copenhagen. 4 people are in a critical condition. That means that 17 people injured in total. And of course, those reports that between 5 and 10 people were injured in the crash, we're now hearing 17 people injured in total, 4 in a critical condition. So that update coming on the train collision, 2 trains colliding in Denmark, prompting a massive emergency response. It happened about 40 kilometres, 25 miles north of Copenhagen.
Now, victims of the faulty post office IT system Capture say they're prepared to take their cases to the European Court of Human Rights to see their names cleared.
So if you remember, Capture was the software that was used before Horizon, which was, of course, another massive scandal that saw hundreds of people wrongfully convicted of theft. Those people have now all been exonerated.
But Capture victims say they're still waiting for justice and are calling for a new law to automatically clear their names. Adele Robinson has this report.
You'll get there. You'll see.
We'll get there.
We will.
We will get there.
We will.
2 families united by the same scandal, meeting for the first time.
She died heart failure, 62.
It's no age.
Anniversary today.
It's terrible.
I'm sorry.
Steve Marston and the family of Pat Owen, who died before she could clear her name.
You never remarried? You never found another...
No, there's no one else. Never would be.
As soon as he started talking about Mum, I started crying, because he's lost so much, and he's just spent so long on his own.
Both prosecuted for stealing by the post office in the 1990s, both potential miscarriages of justice.
I used to be proud of working for the post office. I loved it, and, they just, take everything away from you.
Theirs are the first cases to reach the Court of Appeal, relating to Capture, a faulty post office accounting system used before the Horizon scandal.
This is a petition to actually instigate exactly the same scheme as Horizon had.
Steve's calling for a new law to automatically exonerate victims, something the post office chair backed personally a few months ago.
Do you think that the government should legislate to overturn Capture-related convictions? Nigel?
My opinion, yes.
And yet the post office is fighting Pat Owen's case in court.
He said one thing, and 10 days later they're doing something else.
Exactly.
So what, is he just a name?
Yeah.
Or is he actually running the post office?
Yeah.
Lord Beamish helped expose the Capture scandal and supports calls for a law to clear victims.
I think what the Post Office are doing, again, using our public money to defend the indefensible. In the Pat Owen case, there is clear evidence at the time that Capture was at fault. They did exactly the same with the Rising cases and should have learnt lessons from that.
The government's already compensating and apologising to some people affected by the Capture system who were not convicted. But the Post Office, which is government-owned, is still fighting in court, arguing the software didn't play a key role, for example. And families are asking, how can both be true?
Why are we being discriminated against?
The Post Office say they want all unsafe convictions overturned and will do everything to ensure appeals are considered in accordance with the law. And the government said that it's vital to let the independent judiciary consider the safety of convictions.
We'd love to see her name cleared, it would.
Yeah.
Hopefully she's watching and think, get in there, son.
Some victims now say, however, that they're prepared to take this all the way to the European Court of Human Rights.
They have to learn that there's a line and they've crossed it.
For them, it will never be over until all names are cleared. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Cancer cases in the UK have reached a record high, with around one person being diagnosed every 80 seconds.
Well, let's talk to Oliver about this, shall we? It's astonishing. It's so many people are affected by this. Is it good news that we're getting more diagnosis, that we're more aware that people have it so we can treat it, or is it actually a bit more complicated than that?
There's good news in that people are surviving for more than 10 years now, more than what they did previously. But the warning from Cancer Research UK is actually, although we've got these better survival rates, the NHS is struggling with a growing population, with an ageing population. And when you get older, you're more likely to get cancer. So now, on average, there's 403,000 people every year who are diagnosed with some form of cancer. And the problem for the NHS is that it can't really deal with a lot of these pressures. So cancer waiting times are the worst that we've ever had on record. 1 in every 4 people is waiting more than 2 months to get the cancer treatment that they need. And that is critical, because the earlier that you get diagnosed and the earlier that you start treatment, your survival rate and chances go a lot better.
That's staggering, I have to say, that it's the worst waiting time for treatment on record.
What are the other kind of bits of advice that come from this report, or is it just a sort of a reflection on the state of play?
Basically, what they want to see is the government rolling out more of the screening programmes to wider parts of society. So currently, if you want to get screened for various cancers, that depends on your gender and your age. And actually, not everybody fits into those brackets. You can get cancer at any stage of your life. And what Cancer Research UK wants to see happen is that this is rolled out a lot wider. They want to see the government implementing the new National Cancer Strategy and doing what they say that they're going to do. They say that just coming up with the cancer strategy isn't enough. And actually, there are disparities in different parts of the country. So in England, the government committed to trying to bring those waiting lists down. But in Northern Ireland, because of all the problems that they had without having a government for quite a long time, the waiting list problem there is far worse than what we've got over here.
Oh, great stuff. Thanks so much. Let's have a look at the weather now.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
So the good news is that the weather is going to be pretty settled for the rest of the week. It will be warm during the day, although if you're a hay fever sufferer, it's worth warning that pollen levels are going to stay high. Chilly start to the morning, but most places look fine. There are a few early clouds over central and eastern parts of the country, but they will start to lift. And that means it should be pretty sunny come lunchtime. Do remember your sun cream. If you're out and about, UV levels will be moderate, and it will be warmer and less windy than recently in most places. So a nice day, although cooler and a bit more breezy by the North Sea coasts.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
Coming up, we're going to be talking to the leader of the Liberal Democrats. Sir Ed Davey is going to be on the programme with us, so don't go anywhere.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
I bet right now you often find yourself asking why. Why was a certain decision taken? Why did something happen? Why did they say or do that? I'm Neil Patterson, and it's my job as a journalist to find out why. Just explain why.
It's a difficult one.
Well, I mean, it's massive.
It's a very, very severe situation.
So if you want to make sense of this complicated world, Sky News' new podcast, This Is Why, is your daily fix. One story every day, and we can find out why together. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed. Mr. Zuma, Sky News. People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her. It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Right, let's hear from the Liberal Democrats now, shall we? So Ed Davey, I'm pleased to say, a leader of the Liberal Democrats, joins us now. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
It's been a week that's been dominated, of course, by the Mandelson saga. The Prime Minister said that he regrets and apologises that he didn't get the information, that he made the wrong calls. But he's also saying that he hasn't done enough to, really, I guess, be held responsible for this. Do you think he should now face investigation by the Privileges Committee?
Yes, I do. I think we do need to ask many more questions, whether it's about him not following the advice of Simon Case, who was the Cabinet Secretary, who said you did need to get security vetting before you confirmed Mandelson in place, or his looking for a job for Matthew Doyle. I mean, there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered. But I think it's the overall approach of this government. I mean, you remember Boris Johnson, a bit of a rogue. People had sort of almost baked that in when they voted for him.
They expected he was.
They almost expected he was, not going to always tell the truth. And obviously he tripped up and quite rightly went particularly over the scandal of Partygate. But I think, Keir Starmer ran, didn't he, as not Boris Johnson. He ran as someone who was going to be straight. You could trust his judgment. It wouldn't be chaotic. And there'd be change, and he's not delivered that. And I think that's why people are so, frustrated.
Do you think he needs to step down over this? Should he resign?
Well, I've already called for that, but I think there's now the Labour MPs have got to reflect really hard on this. The Prime Minister has not delivered the change. He's kept the chaos going. They've made so many bad mistakes, and not just on this, on the economy, on taxes. Frankly, I would argue on the relationship with Trump, which is in many ways behind the whole Mandelson saga. And I think that's damaged our economy and damaged our country. And they've been very timid on things like, rebuilding the relationship with Europe. So I think Labour MPs will probably say, look, he's not going to take us to victory. He's damaging the government and damaging the country.
Just on this call for him to resign specifically over this, because nobody's actually contradicting the Prime Minister's version of events, that he wasn't told about these findings, and also that he personally didn't put pressure on the Foreign Office. So, he sacked those people who he holds responsible for that. He shouldn't have to resign over that, should he?
Well, we have said that if he was shown to mislead Parliament, and one of the reasons I want the Privileged Committee to look at that is because I think there's still suspicions around that, to be frank.
But it has to be deliberate misleading, doesn't it? It can't just be misleading because you didn't know something. That would be unfair, wouldn't it?
So let the Privileged Committee look at the detail, because I'm not convinced by some of the Prime Minister's answers, to be frank with you. But let's look, the Privileged Committee look at it.
No one's contradicted him, have they? So Ollie Robbins didn't contradict what his argument.
I still think there are a lot of questions. So I mentioned the fact that he didn't follow the advice of the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, which was, in December, before the appointment was confirmed, that security vetting should happen first. So there's a real question of whether he followed due process. He's telling Parliament he did follow due process. So there are some issues to be asked. But I think, frankly, for the country, I can't really speak for the Labour Party, but for the country, he's not really delivered on what he said he was delivered. And I think we have to move on. We have serious threats. We have the inflation, because of Trump's idiotic war, an economy that's failing. We need a change.
But some would say that is the risk of a change as well, right? That we do have this international conflict, that we do have inflation that is already ticking up and is expected to go higher, that, we're talking about jet fuel running out, for example. Is this really the time for a leadership contest that would be, by its nature, destabilising and distracting?
Well, Labour would have to, any new Labour leader would have to change policy in a quite significant way, because I think it's the policies that Keir Starmer is behind that have caused the problems. His relationship with Trump, his failed relationship with Trump, his inability to rebuild the relationship with Europe so much faster and deeper to deal with the cost of living.
And you're talking about that today as well, aren't you, with Trumpflation, as you're putting it?
Yeah, no, exactly. If you look at the Trumpflation, the increase in the cost of living that's hitting people, yes, it's hitting people at the pumps with petrol and diesel prices. That's the obvious one now. It's going to get worse with energy prices and food prices. But actually, and people have missed this, it's hitting people in mortgages. So the fixed deals, 2-year deals on mortgage costs have gone up by a percentage point. Now, when you project that across the country, some people will see their mortgage bills over the year go up by thousands of pounds. That is the cost of Trump's idiotic war to millions of people.
I'm keen to talk about the local elections as well, because what we are seeing is they're kind of fragmenting a politics two-party system, not happening anymore. So you'd think that was a huge opportunity, right, for other parties as well. But, the Lib Dems aren't necessarily benefiting. You're fifth place in the polls. If you look at, for example, you're the guy who's taken the Lib Dems from being the third party to being the fifth party.
No, we're the third party because we had our best result for 100 years at the last general. But let me take your...
A lot's changed since that election, as you know.
Well, a lot's
right? For all parties. Come on, this is sort of the point. You're not taking advantage of it.
Well, we keep winning in local elections. Last year, we were more council by-elections than any party. But let me take you to May, because we're going to do really well in May. You can look whatever poll you like, but we're going to make big gains. We're going to make gains off the Conservatives in places like Surrey and Sussex and Hampshire and Hertfordshire and Huntingdonshire. We're going to make gains off Labour in London, in Birmingham, in Newcastle. I think we're doing really well in Scotland. So I think you will see on May the 8th and the 9th, as the results come through, Liberal Democrats making gains both from Tories and from Labour and across the country.
Do you take responsibility as leader for taking your party to third place in the polls to fifth place in the polls consistently over this year? I take responsibility for our best result in 100 years under my leadership. Because in a kind of weak field, it feels like, you're the one who's underperforming.
I don't think we are in elections. So you can take polls. Before the last general election, people said, well, you're not performing well in the polls. And we got our best result for 100 years and 72 MPs. Last year, people were saying, well, look at the polls. We won more council by-elections than any other party. So the polls that matter are when voters vote and they go to the ballot boxes. And so far, under my leadership, we've kept winning. I'm arguing to you that in May, we'll have our 8th year in a row of consecutive gains in local elections. That's never happened before. And by the end of this Parliament, we're going to be one of the 2 biggest parties in local government. Let me say that again. By the end of this Parliament, we'll keep winning and be one of the 2 biggest parties in local government. And when you go into the general election with 72 MPs and being one of the biggest parties in local government, we will be crucial to the outcome of the next general election.
Just finally, I'm hearing rumours about the Greens and the Lib Dems doing, I guess, kind of unofficial deals in these elections.
I haven't heard those at all.
Campaigning in some wards, kind of carving them up, so you don't split the vote, so you take more vote, you've got more chance of unseating Labour in these wards. You're saying you haven't picked this up at all?
Not at all. I mean, I've seen as well we're going head-to-head with the Greens in some places. But it is true that many of the areas that we can really win are areas where the Greens are weak. In Surrey, in Sussex, in Hampshire, in Hertfordshire, the Greens are nowhere. And in a lot of the seats that we can win off Labour, the Greens are nowhere. In places like Merton, for example, in London. And it just happens that they're nowhere strong. And so lots of people talk about, you know, different parties doing well in other areas. In the areas where we're competing, we're doing really well.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Davey, speaking to us there. Thank you very much.
Now, as we wrap up the hour with a story that's caught our attention, why do firstborns earn more? So a study suggests it could be down to the bugs they bring home from nursery.
Yeah, this is absolutely, well, it's a pretty eye-catching story. So I've looked into this a little bit previously, actually, because I was quite interested in the kind of split between firstborns and secondborns. And what's interesting, to me anyway, is that it's also due on the age gap. So if you have an age gap of 2 years or less between your first and secondborn, the firstborn will outperform. If it's more, then that difference goes. So my theory is more about exhausted parents not having time to look after toddlers and babies.
This article points to whether you get more sicknesses. Maybe the elder one brings them home and you haven't got the immunity yet. I have to say, though, reading it in detail, that the difference they point to is that by the age of 30, there's a 1.9% pay difference, which doesn't seem very big. So I don't know that it's really clear on that. The other thing, I mean, I'm the middle child of 3, and I just don't buy this. I think having had an older brother to take the risks gave you the confidence to do it yourself. I honestly think it's the other way around from my own experience. And this survey says firstborns were 7% more likely to aim for university and things like that. So I'm not sure I buy into it as much.
We're sceptical, I think it's fair to say.
We'll be right back.
See you in a few moments.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
Sophie and Wilf, good morning from me as well. Let's get to it.
New standards on maternity care are being rolled out to reduce the number of women dying each year after England's top midwife admits to us care currently isn't good enough.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps released video purportedly showing them seizing 2 foreign container ships in the Strait of Hormuz.
In Lebanon, we see the grief and anger at the sight of a deadly Israeli strike which hit less than an hour before the ceasefire began.
However, strikes do continue, and Israel is accused by Lebanon of targeting journalists after the killing of Amal Khalil yesterday.
Plus, breaking news this morning, 2 trains collide in Denmark, leaving dozens injured, with 4 in critical condition.
We'll also, of course, talk about the Mandelson saga, when another civil servant faces MPs today, this time from the Cabinet Office, and we'll take that live. Hello, thanks for being with us today. We're talking maternity to begin the programme because the NHS England's chief midwife has admitted to us that maternity care is not good enough, but does say the NHS is still a safe place to have a baby. The number of women who die during pregnancy or shortly afterwards is going up.
New clinical standards are being brought in, including more mental health assessments and action on blood clots. Our health correspondent, Laura Bundock, spoke with Kate Brentworth and started by asking her why there's still such a huge problem in 2026.
None of us think that care is in the right place. We don't think that things are good enough, but we are starting to see improvements in safety with all the packages of care that we have put in.
What would you say to a pregnant woman right now who might have been watching the news, reading the headlines, and might feel very frightened about giving birth in an NHS hospital at the moment?
So I spend a lot of time visiting services all around the country, and the thing that unifies them is a sense of restlessness about what is happening in maternity. Every midwife, every obstetrician comes to work because they want a good outcome for the women in front of them. So yes, the NHS is a safe place to have a baby, and I would always urge women, talk to your midwife, talk to your doctor.
We've spoken to a lot of families who've lost babies, and they tell us how they are fighting multiple organisations just to get basic answers.
It's a terrible anguish to lose a child. I think it is one of the worst things that can happen to a human, and our responsibility as leaders in maternity is to make sure that those families do not experience that anguish. It's why we've asked services to look at their bereavement care in great detail, in huge detail, to make sure that families receive the care they need.
We've received recently hundreds and hundreds of emails from women saying a very similar thing, that when it comes to their midwife, they felt ignored.
Being listened to is the most important thing to every woman having a baby. She has the absolute right to be at the centre of her own care, to have her concerns taken seriously. For me, as a practising clinical midwife, if I don't listen to the women in front of me, then I'm not doing my job properly.
I can talk to Laura now. Laura, it's worth pointing out, isn't it, how rare it is to get an interview with a head of midwifery.
Yeah, it really is, because although we've been covering maternity for months and months now, hearing from so many bereaved and harmed families, hearing those in power is a much harder task. Privately, people say things to you, but in public. So it's rare to get access to England's most senior midwife, the Chief Midwifery Officer, Kate Brentworth, with this huge job leading a workforce and a service at a time of serious national scandal and scrutiny. Look, she acknowledges families are angry, they're frustrated, the ordeals they've been through. And, you know, you understand why, because we've had inquiry after inquiry, we've had failure after failure, we've had countless secretaries of state sorrowfully making these admissions that things aren't right, and yet maternity services remain in the state they are. For Kate Brintworth, she says, you know, there's a lot to do, basically, but she says the workforce she meets are not complacent. There is a restlessness for change, and she's already starting to see the green shoots of that change. But I think speaking to families about what she's said, for them, it's false assurances, it's empty words. They say to me they want to see leadership, they want accountability, they want evidence of fundamental change. And for all of those things, the senior midwife is not providing any of that.
Is for those families the focus on people like the senior midwife, or much more on the government, who, as you know, we've discussed a lot, are sort of still waiting for another review to complete?
Yeah, because Baroness Amos is the person tasked with the rapid review into maternity and neonatal services. She's due to report back in June. But obviously, behind the scenes, the policymakers, those at NHS England and those delivering these services, are very much at the front line of this. And the chief midwife there does not sit on this task force that the health secretary is chairing, but she will be very instrumental in delivering the change with those who are working within her service. And you know, the midwives themselves are feeling exhausted, burnt out, with very, very low morale as well. And you've got families too incredibly angry. It is a big job on her hands, and you know, getting it right is going to be a huge challenge.
Yeah, I tried to sort of challenge the government on, you know, Wilf's point about whether they need another review, why they're waiting when we've had so many recommendations before. Laura's talked about this before. This is what Alex Norris had to say. The statistics out today, frankly, beg a belief. 20% more mums dying in childbirth than they were like around a decade ago, more babies dying. In 2026, it is appalling, frankly. The chief midwife telling Sky News today that it's not good enough. It isn't good enough, is it?
Well, it's not, and, you know, a lot of your viewers will be people from Nottingham, from my community. We've been at the very forefront of this. Our maternity scandal, which is our review through the wonderful Donna Ockenden, is coming to its full, its final stages. That is going to have some very, very upsetting conclusions to it. We know that already. We know that, you know, ours is not the only one. There are others around the country too. We know that through the national inquiry that's going on, that's going to tell us a lot too about the state of, you know, of maternity services across the country. You know, these are really awful things to read and to hear, and drive us to change.
I think what the family's thinking.
They're just not happy at the moment. That they don't have much trust in anyone's ability to bring about the meaningful change. Mostly they want a public inquiry into this, such as is the level of their feeling at the moment. And I think to hear the chief midwife saying NHS maternity is a safe place to give birth, when we know that 2/3 of maternity units are inadequate or requiring improvement, it's a difficult one there. It's a difficult one.
That's one way of putting it.
And more of the interview to come later today.
Yeah. The whole thing is worth a watch.
Laura, great stuff. Thank you. Now, if you've been affected by these issues and would like to share your story with us, do get in touch. maternitystories@sky.uk.
Let's move to the war in the Middle East now, because Iranian state TV has broadcast some pretty dramatic footage of Iranian forces seizing foreign-flagged vessels trying to pass through the Strait of Hormuz.
It was released after Iran targeted 3 more ships over the past 24 hours. A speedboat is seen pulling up next to a Liberian-flagged container ship before armed men with their faces covered climb a ladder and take control of the vessel.
Well, Iran says it fired on 3 ships in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday and seized 2 of them. This is after, of course, Donald Trump extended the ceasefire. Tensions remain high as the US maintains its blockade of Iranian ports, which has led to the closure of the passage.
Let's cross to Sally, who's in Dubai for us. And, I mean, Sally, I guess the sort of slight plus side of the last few days is that the ceasefire has been extended and we're not seeing bombs dropping again. But as that footage just shows, the Strait is as closed as ever.
Yeah, that's right. The ceasefire is holding, which is very welcome news. But the Strait of Hormuz has become a battleground, essentially. Both sides trying to shape the narrative with their own videos. We saw US Central Command release their video at the weekend of US Marines seizing an Iranian tanker, and then this very dramatic footage from the Iranians showing the IRGC seizing a Greek-owned vessel and an Italian-owned vessel in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. A third one, it's also been confirmed, was attacked. Now, it's really interesting, very different styles. The US is much more operational. The Iranian is much more dramatic, set to music, with IRGC guards with their faces covered, carrying weapons. But both are designed to try and control the information space here. And all these incidents are staying below the threshold of open conflict while this ceasefire is in place. And of course, the bigger picture is that the Strait of Hormuz remains essentially paralyzed, which is having such far-reaching consequences when it comes to the global economy. Now, the White House has said they do not think that yesterday's attacks by the Iranians on these 3 vessels constitute a violation of the ceasefire, but it's very interesting. I mean, we can see now that commercial shipping is not going to take these risks while this remains such a high-threat environment. And those small vessels that you saw in the video that the Iranians are using to attack ships, they've been using those for weeks now. We know that the Iranian Navy has been hammered, but these small attack boats that they've been using in the Strait of Hormuz remain very effective at keeping commercial shipping at a standstill, making it far too dangerous for them to try and pass the strait safely. I should say, you know, the ceasefire is holding and it's brought some welcome calm to this region, but it's hard to see where we go from here. The Iranians are saying for as long as the US blockade on the Strait of Hormuz remains in place, then they will not reopen the Strait of Hormuz from their side in terms of letting commercial shipping and tankers through. And the Americans are saying, well, for as long as the Iranians don't come to the table with a deal, with an agreeable deal, then this naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz for Iranian shipping will remain in place. So we're at deadlock. What now? Well, the only alternative to a deal is more fighting. And there's no suggestion at the moment that either side wants to return to that. So they're going to have to talk their way out of all of this. And that's not looking very promising either.
Sally, great stuff. Thanks so much. And just a reminder of what we said earlier. In light of all of this, oil prices on the rise again. Brent crude is at 103, up 1.5% today. But you know, to state the obvious, there back above 100 earlier in the week when we pulled back to 90. You know, feels a long time ago now.
It really does. Now to Lebanon, because Lebanon's Prime Minister has accused Israel of war crimes through the targeting of journalists. It's after the death of a journalist working in the south of the country.
Amal Khalil, who worked for the Al Akbar newspaper, it's a left-leaning independent newspaper in Lebanon, known for its pro-Hezbollah stance, had sought shelter in a house from an Israeli strike together with a colleague. The house was then hit in a second strike, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. Emergency teams recovered Khalil's colleague, Zinab Faraj, alive with injuries and transferred her to hospital. The Health Ministry added that a Lebanese Red Cross ambulance sent to evacuate casualties came under a stun grenade attack and live fire, at first preventing rescuers from reaching Khalil.
Well, the Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said targeting journalists, obstructing access to them by relief teams and even targeting their locations again after those teams arrive constitutes described war crimes. Israel's targeting of media workers in the south while they carry out their professional duties is no longer isolated incidents but has become an established approach that we condemn and reject, as do all international laws and conventions. Well, Israel says it's investigating the strikes and it denies targeting rescue efforts.
We're joined now by Diana Magda, who's in Beirut for us. Diana, first of all, just reflect for us on the killing of Amal Khalil and the details that we know around it.
Well, it brings to 9 the number of Lebanese journalists killed this year in this war. Amal Khalil, as you said, working for Al Akbar newspaper, she was in Israeli-occupied territory below what Israel now calls its yellow line, close to the town of Bin Jubail, as you said, a town called Al-Tiri. There's been very, very fierce fighting around there, and the details around the story are fairly complicated. The IDF denies that it fired on rescue teams, but that's certainly the story that we are hearing from the Lebanese Health Ministry, that after the vehicles that she was in and another vehicle in front of her, which was hit by an airstrike, 2 people in that vehicle killed, she and her colleague Zainab then took shelter in a house. and another airstrike was called upon that house. And then when rescue teams went in to try and dig her out of the rubble, Israeli forces threw a stun grenade and live fire to prevent them from doing so. So they were only able to extract Amal Khalil's body from the rubble a good 6 or 7 hours later. She had been able to make a call to colleagues, to her family, to say where she was, so they knew where she was. Israel has a drone in the air all the time. They know what is happening in that kind of territory, but they've made it very clear that anything that they deem an imminent threat, and I say that in inverted commas, really anybody who crosses that yellow line, they've essentially said is fair game. They've warned residents from going back to that area that Israel now occupies. They are razing the towns and villages that are there. They are engaging in very, very fierce fighting with Hezbollah there. And Amal Khalil was doing what a journalist should do, incredible bravery to go down there and try and document what was happening in her country. And I think, let's just be honest about this, Israel has targeted and killed other journalists. Just at the end of last March, they said they specifically targeted a journalist for Al-Manar that is Hezbollah affiliated, saying that he was part of the Hezbollah Radwan special forces. They killed 2 other journalists in that strike too. They have killed hundreds of journalists in Gaza. And they brought a whole crew of Israeli journalists into Israeli-occupied occupied territory just a few days ago to show them what was happening there. And she was trying to do the same from her side about her country. And this is what's happened to her. So there will be a protest today in Beirut, which we will go to, and then also her funeral a bit further in the south.
And of course, all eyes on any talks for peace, for a potential ceasefire. What is the latest when it comes to those talks that are happening in Washington?
So those are happening late this evening, our time, and it's still at an ambassadorial level. We understand that Mike Huckabee, the US ambassador to Israel, is flying back for those talks. It's mediated by the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. It is baby steps at the moment. You know, peace is not something actually that a tiny minority of people think in this country will ever happen. Yes, a ceasefire is really the best they can hope for. The Lebanese presidency has been talking about the fact that Israel must at least stop demolishing villages and towns in the south if they are to push this to the next level, i.e. to ministers meeting anyone above ambassadors, and that there has to be a proper ceasefire. Yesterday, we saw 5 people killed in Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon. This ceasefire hangs very much in the balance, and I think it will be a very long process to try and get people around the idea of talking with Israel to try and bring things to a stop. The Shiite community believe that this is essentially a massive land grab on the part of Israel. You have Turkey, Saudi Arabia not wanting this to be a US-dominated peace negotiation. You know, there are a lot of parties with a lot of different interests here, but I think the priority for the Lebanese people and the presidency is just to make sure that this ceasefire keeps holding. And Sunday is the end of this 10-day period, and to just see if they can push this very fragile truce for longer than that.
Diana, as ever, thanks so much. Diana Magnier there in Beirut. Some breaking news. A massive emergency response is underway in Denmark after 2 trains collided just north of Copenhagen. Well, Oliver's here with more on what we've been discovering in the last few hours, Oliver.
Yes, well, so this happened just after 5:30 this morning, UK time, 6:30 in the morning in Denmark. And it's happened just to the north of Copenhagen in a place called Hillerød. It is a region that's close to the sea. And at about 6:30 in the morning, there was 2 local trains that have had a head-on collision. I think we've got some pictures of what this looks like. And there are 17 patients in total that have been identified by the Capital Region's emergency response team. 4 of those are in a critical condition. We're being told that all of the passengers have now been taken off these 2 trains, but in total 7 ambulances were sent to the scene. 2 acute doctors' vehicles were also in attendance, and 1 military helicopter was also there to try to convey some of those patients to hospital. The police in Denmark are about to hold a press conference within the next few minutes, and in about 15 minutes' time, we're also expecting to be hearing from those regional officials from the capital region in Copenhagen.
Oliver, great stuff. Thanks so much.
Now, the Home Secretary is expected to sign a new deal with France today to try and stop migrants crossing the Channel in small boats. We can go live to the French coast, and our Europe correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, is there. So what's different with this deal?
Morning, Sophie. Well, the last one ran out at the end of March, but was extended temporarily for a couple of months whilst they renegotiated the terms of the deal. So the difference with this deal is that there's been an increase in the funding given by the British government to the French government. It's now going to be worth £662 million over 3 years, and the money is going to be spent on a number of what they hope are going to be improvements to the way the policing takes place across the northern French coast. So that's going to be more police trained in riot situations and dealing with violent situations to be deployed permanently in this area. New surveillance, new cameras, more drones, helicopters as well to patrol the French beaches. It's a very long stretch that the smuggling gangs use, around 75 miles. So they have become very adept at using different inlets and changing their tactics according to the way the French police it. And one of the things that we have seen in recent years is the use of taxi boats, where they launch the boats further up the coast and then sail them down and pick up migrants before making the journey across the Channel. And the French police have now started intercepting those taxi boats, but it's expected that they will have to do more of that. And one key difference to this deal is that it comes with a condition, and that if things don't improve after a year, then the funding can be withdrawn. So the Home Secretary in northern France today to sort of sign that deal, do a bit of a photo call as well, and then we'll have to see whether it has an effect. Already this year, the numbers are down slightly, but it is early. The weather, I mean, you can see it's pretty windy today, too windy for anyone to try and attempt the crossing. But of course, as we go into the better weather, then you'd expect the numbers trying to make the crossing would increase quite significantly.
Ali, as always, great stuff. Thanks so much.
Well, the Mandelson saga continues. It's kicking off again in just over an hour when another civil servant faces MPs today. That's Kat Little from the Cabinet Office. We're joined now by Tom McTague, who is the editor-in-chief of the New Statesman. I should also say he's one of the most kind of, I think, insightful and independent thinkers in Westminster as well. So a great person to talk to this week with everything that is going on with Keir Starmer. You had this very striking image on the front cover of the New Statesman. Talk to us about that choice.
Well, I agonised over it, to be honest. You know, I didn't want to put this image on the cover. I didn't want to write the piece that I wrote this week, the images of the Prime Minister alone and looking quite small, sort of in the spotlight on stage. And I chose that because that's how it felt. That's how it felt this week. You know, it felt that he was abandoning people that he was loyal to, that they were his people. You know, Ollie Robbins was the kind of a key person appointed to that position and then cast aside. And you start to see a pattern over Keir's premiership, you know, where he casts aside quite a few different people in this manner. And I think people around him are concerned about that and the sense that, is he the man that we thought he was? Or is this kind of ruthlessness revealing something that is a little bit worrying? And I think that is the kind of noises that we're hearing from people close to Keir Starmer.
On the sort of fundamental question of the type of person he is, in your excellent long read article, you say he, in part, got elected because he was seen as the opposite of Boris Johnson. Mm-hmm. But some people very close to him, some people are almost likening the two now.
Yeah, I was struck by that, you know, speaking to somebody, again, who has worked with both of these people. And they are polar opposites in so many ways. And yet, this person was struck by thinking back to the Partygate and thinking about how Boris Johnson would come out and say, I take responsibility for this, but then somebody else would pay, and then somebody else would pay, and then somebody else would pay. And this person said to me that that's exactly how it feels now. You watch a statement from the Prime Minister and he says, I take full responsibility for the political decision to appoint Lord Mandelson to the US ambassadorship. But then it's always somebody else's fault. And that's what I thought was so striking about this past week with Ollie Robbins. You know, watching that evidence and thinking, what is it that he did fundamentally wrong that cost him his job? It was to not block the Prime Minister's choice for the ambassador. And Ollie Robbins was just summarily dismissed. There wasn't even a sort of conversation where he was brought in, can you explain what happened? He was just gone. And the Prime Minister is saying there in the House of Commons, it's my fault still, you know, I made the wrong decision. It just seems completely off, and it doesn't seem in keeping with the Prime Minister's character and the Prime Minister's record as a public servant going back decades.
But the Boris Johnson comparison, I think, is interesting, and this week, to me, interviewing some ministers on the kind of like morning round, if you like, has brought me back a little bit to interviewing people, politicians during the Boris Johnson era as well, in that it's been difficult for people to maintain the line they've been given, and the line then changes and they're more open, like a couple of hours afterwards. And I've been kind of wrestling with it for a bit, because I think there is a comparison, but also, I guess, you know, it's not as serious, the things that Keir Starmer was accused of in some ways than at the time, because he does have this kind of plausible deniability of it all. What's your read of it? Are we in the end days of Keir Starmer? Or actually, is that a bit overblown? Is it longer away?
Well, as you put it, Zoe, it's so hard to judge, isn't it? Because you start to see things moving. And you see, in interviews that I've been watching you do, you sort of see the line shift during the interview, where somebody sort of, like, I can't hold this any longer.
Yeah, you can see the moment almost. They're like, actually, this is not a sustainable line.
Yeah, and I have to change course. And like you say, that is reminiscent. In some senses, it is more serious than the Partygate, and in some senses, it's not. You know, as you say, Starmer's own behaviour, he made a choice, he has acknowledged that it was the wrong choice, and, you know, in a sense, we could leave it there. But it's sort of rumbling on for these process reasons. But at the heart of it, isn't it not a worse political choice over the appointment of Lord Mandelson, given what we know about...
Although Boris Johnson, I guess it was Pincher, wasn't it? It was the Pincher, that's what I keep going back to, rather than Partygate.
Well, but then none of us think about that anymore, do we?
One of the differences, though, is the extent to which it's Westminster insidery versus cuts through, and I think Partygate obviously cut through to the whole nation so much because of the experience of lockdown. Just on a different comparison, Tom, I wonder if there's a growing similarity with Theresa May, who obviously faced a vote of no confidence and survived it, but ultimately went after some terrible May election results, more on the European election side as it was back then. And that came down really to her deciding, because of one or two key allies, deciding time was up, as opposed to there being this sort of herd movement of all of the MPs in the cabinet kind of forcing the decision as happened with Boris Johnson. Do you think there could be some similarities there? And where do you think Keir Starmer's mind is? If he wants to fight this, it's quite hard to remove him.
Yes, yeah, the comparison is a good one. You always look back, don't you, and think, oh, he's actually more like that person, or more like that person, or more like that person. But I think, to your point about the elections, that was an existential threat to the Conservative Party. It was Nigel Farage's Brexit party crushing them at that election. And it looked as if the Conservative Party carry on, they are finished. And so they had to change course. Now, that is the threat that looms over Starmer here, quite clearly, that they are staring down the barrel of defeats, not just in local elections, but in Scotland and in Wales. And that is existential for the Labour Party. And so I think you are going to see movement after May 7th. But we've still got the main candidate, the one that most people think is the front-runner to replace Keir Starmer, not in Parliament.
Andy Burnham, you're talking about. You think he's the front-runner over Angela Rayner and West Streeting?
I think he currently is, because he has the support, may have the support in the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, and the party.
Interesting, very interesting.
Final question, the percentage likelihood that he's Prime Minister in 12 months' time?
Andy Burnham.
No, Keir Starmer.
Oh, Keir Starmer. 12 months' time, I think, is a long window now. I think it's unlikely he'll be still Prime Minister.
Very, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on.
Thank you.
Coming up, we're going to be talking to the Executive Chair of the Independent Pharmacies Association. How much have the blockading of the Strait of Hormuz impacted medicine supply? We'll discuss that.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Welcome back. Well, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is impacting not just fuel supply and food supply, but also the supply and cost of medicines.
So the Independent Pharmacies Association is warning of cuts to services, also closures even due to rising costs. They say the government needs to urgently address a deepening funding crisis, or more pharmacies could actually have to shut up their doors for good.
We're joined now by Dr. Leila Hambeck. She's Executive Chair of the Independent Pharmacies Association and joins us now. Thanks so much for joining us. Good morning to you. Good morning. Let's talk first about medicine supplies. I mean, is there potentially a genuine shortage?
Oh, well, we're seeing that happening already. So earlier this year, we had shortages of aspirin, for example. And now with the war in Iran and the closure of Strait of Hormuz, we're seeing increasingly medicines going up in prices. So in March, for example, we had the record number of medicines being on concession, which means that they're higher prices than they normally are.
And why is that? Is that because the medicines are travelling through the Strait, or is it because of the rising costs of oil and energy impacting it?
So it's a perfect storm, basically. So we've already had issues in the country with regards to medicines, you know, because the vast majority of medicines we supply here are generic medicines, and they come through India and China. So we're very dependent on those countries. And whatever happens in terms of like with availability of raw ingredients, and a lot of these medicines are obviously petroleum, you know, the solvents used in them are petroleum-based products. And so therefore that has an effect. But also the rising costs generally for deliveries, and petrol and all of that is adding to it.
So just to be, I'm still all these things need to be spelled out to me basically. So the raw materials from the Middle East going to China and India is part of the issue as well, and that's been shutting down. Okay.
So yeah, everything is kind of comes together to create this perfect storm. And we wrote to the Secretary of State more than a month ago when we got hold of the news about the Strait of Hormuz being closed, warning him that we need to add medicines to the National Risk Register. Right now, we have so many medicines going up in prices that pharmacists are simply out of pocket. They can't afford buying them.
And that you wrote to Wes Streeting, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. And just to be clear, though, in the short term, is what you're talking about prices going up, not actual shortage of supply?
We do have shortages of medicines. So we've got, for example, blood pressure medicines that are being in short supply. We've got some antidepressants being in short supply. And we feel that in the coming weeks, if the situation continues with the Strait of Hormuz, there's going to be a national risk. And that's what we are calling for Secretary of State to put plans in place. And we haven't heard anything from him, unfortunately, around what needs to be happening from their side, and we're on the front line.
Just to follow up on this one point, I mean, in a moment where things do look a little bit short in the short term, presumably, again, going back to the spelling out, I mean, drugs, they come in by plane. They're not on those massive ships predominantly. So we can, if we suddenly need more medicine, fly them in? Can we not or not?
Well, first of all, manufacturing is affected. So, for example, if raw materials are in short supply, manufacturing will be delayed. So that's, kind of creates this sort of chain. When manufacturing is delayed, then suppliers get it later. And then when their fuel bills go up, then they can't kind of deliver to us on time. And so therefore, we are affected. So it kind of goes hand in hand, all of the whole process, creating the situation that we are currently in, and it's going to get worse if nothing gets done about it.
So what are you calling for Wes Streeting to do?
So first of all, add medicines to the national risk. Secondly, making sure that they hoard some of these very common medicines that we currently have supply issues with, to make sure that we are not left without any. And we are asking for pharmacists to be getting the relevant funding to be able to purchase these highly costed medicines as they keep going up in prices. And also appointing someone who brings all of that together within the Department of Health to make sure that things flow.
In terms of the kind of short to medium term outlook, how many more weeks of more of the same will be a kind of real problem?
Well, as we enter May, and June, we think that we are going to go into a crisis mode if nothing gets done. If this situation continues, there will be a crisis mode.
And clearly you talked about writing a letter to the Health Secretary a month or so ago. Stepping back from this particular crisis, post the pandemic, where obviously we all got a very loud and clear sort of warning sign of the reliance on places like China for manufacturing our drugs, how much have we, as a country, tried to address that? I think I can tell by your answer. Should we and could we have addressed that?
Of course, of course. I mean, medicine shortages are not, new news, because we've had ADHD medicines being short in supply. We've had, since the pandemic, loads of episodes, HRT medicines being in short supply. And we have been talking about that for a long time. Our processes, our medicine supply chain need to be improving. Otherwise, we'll be in these situations all the time.
And how easy would it have been to address? I mean, like, we all know how long the lead time is to suddenly boost our steel industry again. Could we have addressed this slightly more easily? How complicated is it to manufacture drugs? Is it quite complicated?
Well, it is complicated, but I think, we already have manufacturers in this country, so the learnings are here. And, we just need to make the processes and regulations easier for manufacturers to be able to make medicines in this country. Right now, it doesn't even make, it doesn't make sense for them to import medicines in the UK because of the way that the pricing situation is, let alone manufacturing here.
Dr. Leila Hambach, thanks so much for joining us. Really interesting.
Now, of course, the closure of the Strait also risks provoking tensions between the US and China. We're just discussing, some of those kind of business links as well.
Beijing's a major customer for Iranian oil, and there's concern that strangling supplies could draw it into more direct confrontation.
Now, we're going to talk to somebody next who you might recognise from the traitors. Alexander Dragonetti is here.
Good morning.
Lots of questions about the traitors that I would love to ask you, but you're here with your other hat on because you're a former diplomat.
I am, yes, yeah.
And so you've got experience in the Middle East. I mean, what's your take on where we are and how difficult is it going to be to find some kind of resolution between the US and Iran?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult, is the headline. Trump's got really two options here. He's a gambler. He sort of stepped away from the table for a bit and spent some time in negotiations. But at some point, he's going to either have to decide to make concessions and sort of fold, or he's going to have to escalate in order to put more pressure on the Iranians. And he's going to have to choose a path. At the moment, we're in a holding pattern. And so we're just sort of marking time. But something's got to happen to shift the dynamic.
I mean, clearly, there are lots of factors that could influence him in various directions, and the domestic US situation is one of them. What about countries like China? And are they applying pressure on both sides? And is it effective pressure or not?
Yeah, I mean, in the best case scenario for Trump, China puts pressure on Iran to make a deal. 90% of Iranian oil exports go to China. It's a major customer. They want this war to end, and they want to sort of see the Strait of Hormuz reopened. On the other end of the spectrum, the US is starting to board ships that are coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. That is risky. Again, 90% of oil coming out is to China. If they board a ship going to China, then it's potential for direct confrontation. China could demand the release of the ship. The US could refuse. Tensions could escalate relatively quickly. So China has potential to be helpful to the US, but also quite a risk.
I mean, Donald Trump, I guess, he's all about the art of the deal, right? This is a guy who almost welcomes high-stakes negotiations. But the Iranians, from a negotiating perspective, I mean, they should not be underestimated either, right? So I guess that is what makes it so difficult to predict.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And definitions of success for the US and for Iran are different. The US will say, we've won. We've destroyed a lot of their military. We've put huge economic pressure on them. We've killed some of their leadership. They should fold. The Iranians have a completely different definition of success. They are still in power. They still control their population. They now have a new weapon in the Strait of Hormuz. They could still break out into a nuclear capability. And they will say, on their terms, they've won. This is not an apples-to-apples comparison. Both sides are claiming wins on completely different stories.
How much pressure do you think, though, Iran is under in the short term? I mean, totally accept the sort of asymmetry in the prospects for the country as a whole and the prospects of the defined leadership group. But is that defined leadership group under sufficient pressure to do a deal that they might, on the surface, not want to do or not?
Well, I think in the short term, they've discovered new levers, right? They can attack Gulf countries, they can sow economic chaos through the Strait of Hormuz, they can put pressure on America in ways that we haven't seen to date. So in the short term, actually, they've got quite powerful levers. In the medium term, they have burned their relationship with a lot of the Gulf states. They have a blockade of their own oil exports. About 50 to 70% of those go to the Revolutionary Guards, and they are being strangled economically. So in the medium term, they've lost the relationships, they're going to lose the money, and that will make it significantly harder for the Iranians. So, I wouldn't overestimate how strong a position they're in. I think we can sometimes do that. Problems are coming down the track for them. And Trump knows this, which is why he's kept the blockade in place. That does put pressure.
Do you think that's a sort of understandable short-term tactic from the US? Imposing their own blockade?
Yes, but I think it's also a medium-term tactic. Trump could actually keep this blockade up for weeks or months, and the longer he does that, he says $500 million that the Iranians lose every day. They are already under huge economic sanctions from the West and have been for many years. Put together, that's pretty crippling for the Iranians. The risk is it hits the Iranian people. That's always been the problem with sanctions. But if you can target it, as I say, oil revenues primarily go to the military, then actually that does put pressure on the regime. If people are not paid salaries, however sort of fervent ideologically you are, if you're not being paid, that makes it harder for the regime to control.
I'm interested to get your take on the political saga that we're seeing in Westminster as well. Because, look, you're not a politician, but you work behind the scenes for politicians.
Yes.
So I guess I'm interested in your take on the civil service and how these guys who, their whole job is not to be in the limelight, is to, serve whatever government it is on the day. And then suddenly you've got a case where you've got like Ollie Robbins who says he can't go out and buy a pint of milk without being photographed. Did you feel sorry for these guys?
Yes, for a very short period I sort of know the feeling. Yes, it's really tough, it's sort of that balance between politics and the civil service. And one of the things about the civil service is that there's always a tension between doing things with process, long, they get quite a lot of flack for it, but it's safer. Or doing things fast, cutting corners on the process, but getting things done, which is what they're often accused of not doing. Ironically, in this case, they sort of, Ollie Robbins has come a cropper for getting things done, under pressure from politics, it seems. Therefore, would you expect the civil service to be slightly more risk-averse in future? Possibly.
Alex, thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you.
No, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
I have to say the traitors questions for next time.
Yes, the next lot.
We have a little bit of breaking news to bring you, and Prince Harry has been seen getting off a train in Kiev in the Ukraine, a surprise visit, and it is the Kiev Security Security Forum taking part today and in the coming days, and Prince Harry is a surprise guest to take part in that security forum. Here, pictures just moments ago of him arriving there.
So he travelled to Kyiv by train after the Russian drone strike hitting a railway yard there, where at least one person was killed. And he's also praised Ukraine for bravely and successfully, in his words, defending Europe from Russia. He's saying it's good to be back in Ukraine, and saying that it matters that we don't lose sight of the significance of Ukraine's contribution.
Let's have a look at the weather next.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
The weather will be pretty settled for the rest of the week. It's going to be warm during the day and pollen levels are going to be high. It's a chilly start to the morning, though, but places look fine. There are a few early clouds, and central and eastern parts of the country should see them lift later on. That means it will be pretty sunny come lunchtime. Do remember your sun cream if you're out and about, as UV levels will be moderate. It'll be warmer and less windy than recently in most places. It'll be cooler and a bit more breezy by the North Sea coasts. The afternoon will be sunny just about everywhere.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
Coming up, we are going to be joined by the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Mel Stride, will be joining us.
With respect, Minister, answer the question. It's you.
Hello and welcome, I'm Cathy Newman.
So could the outcome of these elections be manipulated? New me, new show, new furniture. Hard news needs a hard chair. I feel like I'm in therapy. Oh, there's room for two on this one. Do you think people will take me seriously with my feet up?
Sorry, madam, but we're closing now.
Oh, sorry. Sofa sorted. Let's get this show on the road.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them. Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do. Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything. It's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island. The only way out now is by boat. Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first. Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound. Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
I bet right now you often find yourself asking why. Why was a certain decision taken? Why did something happen? Why did they say or do that? I'm Neil Patterson, and it's my job as a journalist to find out why. Just explain why.
It's a difficult one.
Well, I mean, it's massive.
It's a very, very severe situation.
So if you want to make sense of this complicated world, Sky News' new podcast, This Is Why, is your daily fix. One story every day, and we can find out why together. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed. Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Welcome back. Good to have you with us. Well, we are building up to another day of evidence from a member of the civil service. That is Kat Little. She was going to be talking to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee from 9:30 this morning. We can talk now to the Conservatives. Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor at the Exchequer, here with us this morning. Good to have you with us. So let's just talk about Mandelson first. What is your... what exactly are you calling for right now? Should the Prime Minister resign? Does he need to face a privileges committee? What is your position?
He should resign. I mean, I think we've reached a point where the country is facing into a lot of serious problems. People up and down the country facing cost of living pressures. We've got a war in the Middle East. We need a government that's got a grip and a focus. And at the moment, what we're seeing is all this noise is off around what the Prime Minister said and did and when he knew things and so on. It comes down fundamentally in the Mandelson affair to a lack of judgment on the part of the Prime Minister, but equally him not being candid enough with Parliament. And I think that's where things like the Privileges Committee could potentially come in.
What exactly should he resign for?
So, look, first of all, the point of judgment. He knew that Peter Mandelson had been fired twice in his past around inappropriate behaviour. He knew at the point of his appointment that Peter Mandelson had associated himself with a convicted paedophile who had served time in prison for that offence. He also, we know now, because of Ollie Robbins's evidence that he gave to the Select Committee on Tuesday, we know that a huge amount of pressure was being applied from Number 10 to the Foreign Office to get his appointment through. But the point, if I make this last point, Sophie, because I think it's important, that he also, of course, knew that the appointment was made before the vetting had been concluded. And that was something that the then Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, explicitly said in writing should not be the process that was followed. So it was a flawed process. And we're not seeing him being candid and open and transparent when he's come to Parliament.
Just to come in, and I'm coming in because I think calling for a Prime Minister to resign is quite a serious thing. Most of the points you said there were known before, and I'm not diminishing them, but they were known already at a time when you weren't calling for the Prime Minister to resign. The only thing that seems to have changed is you're saying a pressure was put on the Foreign Office from Number 10, but Ollie Robbins wasn't saying that was necessarily from Keir Starmer. It could have been from Morgan McSweeney, we don't know. So why are you calling for him to resign now when you didn't before?
For all the reasons that I've given, and the fundamental point that we are now in a position that because of the lack of judgment of this Prime Minister, because of the way he's conducted himself in relation to Parliament and so on, we have big pressures as a country. What we need at the moment is a Prime Minister that's got a grip of his cabinet, has a clear sense of direction, is leaning into the challenges that we face. And in the absence of that, everybody is getting poorer and things are getting tougher. So it's time to draw a line of movement. It's not just me, it's Labour MPs that are often feeling that.
That could also be an argument to maintain what is going on now, that we're all, in Westminster kind of hooked on this sugar rush of constantly changing leaders, something you guys know a lot about in the Conservative Party, of course. And there are these really serious issues facing the country. We could have a recession. We could have soaring inflation because of what's going on in Iran. Do we need the distraction of a leadership contest or even an election?
Business confidence in our country is at rock bottom. Confidence in the Prime Minister amongst the people of this country is at record lows for a Prime Minister.
So
we do not have a Prime Minister that has got a grip of governing our country. I don't think it's very hard to find anybody that would say that. Well, it's not for me to say. Those are matters for the Labour Party.
But
what
you
we
think
do
there's some people on the Labour benches who do a better good job than Keir Starmer?
Where I start is that this Prime Minister is not fit to continue in office. He's not doing what is required for the good of people up and down this country. He's far too distracted by the events that are of his own making, through his own lack of judgment, and it's time to move on. Where we should now turn our attention to is the Parliamentary Labour Party, who are increasingly restless about this situation, and the Cabinet, because it is in their hands, ultimately, I think, will lie the future of the Prime Minister, and they need to take action.
Just briefly to end, does it remind you of the dying days of Boris Johnson?
Well, look, you know, that was the past, this is now. There's no point in sort of endlessly going over what happened years ago. But the common denominator here is what the country needs is firm, sensible, serious leadership. And I'm afraid that's not what we're getting at the moment, and it is time for the Prime Minister to step down.
OK, Mel Stride, thank you very much indeed.
Do you know who has stepped down?
I can read it on the auto cue. So luckily
Chelsea's
for me.
head coach, Liam Mousinho, although actually he didn't step down.
He was sacked.
He was sacked. There was a clearer route to sacking. The owners said...
More of an autocracy than a democracy, basically.
Yes, exactly.
At Chelsea.
After just 106 days in charge. Unbelievable, poor Liam Mousinho. That said, 5 Premier League games in a row they'd lost.
It's been a difficult time for Chelsea. And I think for those of us who support smaller clubs than Chelsea, the discrepancy between how they've been dealt with in other clubs, you know, Leicester, Sheffield Wednesday, West Brom, potentially, etc. as well, it's good of them, I think, and wholehearted to impose their own points deduction on themselves to really level the playing field. Very kind.
I do like that framing. I haven't got much... I'll keep quiet about it after a month where my team hasn't done particularly well.
Yeah,
but,
Arsenal, yeah. You're lucky we're not talking about that one, but
anyway.
I'm sure there'll be time in the next hour, Wolf, don't worry.
Oh, gosh. No, there won't, because we're going to have a live press conference from senior civil servant Katie Lamb, starting at 9:30. We'll be right back.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Good morning. It's 9 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Reg and Frost.
We're Sophie and Will for a very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
The Mandelson saga continues this hour when another civil servant faces MPs, this time from the Cabinet Office. We'll have that live at past.
New standards on maternity care are being rolled out to reduce the number of women dying each year after England's top midwife admits to us care currently isn't good enough.
There's been a big emergency response in Denmark as 2 trains collide, leaving dozens injured, 4 in a critical condition.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps released video purportedly showing them seizing 2 foreign container ships in the Strait of Hormuz.
Meanwhile, Lebanon accuses Israel of committing war crimes after a journalist was killed in airstrikes on the south of the country.
And Prince Harry makes a surprise trip to Ukraine's capital. Very good morning to you. The Prime Minister's already faced multiple bruising sessions in the Commons this week over the Peter Mandelson vetting scandal. He's set for another difficult day ahead. It's about half an hour away from the most senior civil servant in the Cabinet Office, Kat Little, who will be facing MPs in the Foreign Affairs Selector Committee.
So she's relevant because it's been reported that she knew the concerns around the vetting of Lord Mandelson weeks before the Prime Minister was told. There was also, of course, this allegation from Lord Ollie Robbins that it was the Cabinet Office who were dismissive of the vetting process in its entirety as well. So interesting to hear what she has to say on that. Keir Starmer's denied pressuring officials to rush through the appointment, of course.
This is sort of going to be a great example of drawing out the pressure, I think, on the Prime Minister. You know, sometimes it builds, the Prime Minister comes out, gets through PMQs, it goes away. Not just today, but next week we know Morgan McSweeney will be sitting in front of the committee on Tuesday, and others to follow on the week when we're going to have local elections next week as well. And whilst I guess it's not expected that today will be as damaging for the Prime Minister as Ollie Robbins was, it extends it. It brings another couple of days at least worth of front-page headlines.
I think that's exactly it. Look, Kat Little is a serving civil servant, so we definitely don't expect her to be, speaking out against the Prime Minister or anything. That's not going to happen, but it's that incremental pressure. And really all eyes, I think, on members of the Cabinet as well. To depose a Prime Minister, you need 20% of Labour MPs, but I think really it is going to be all about what members of the Cabinet do, how loyal they are. We've had Alex Norris this morning, who was very loyal to the Prime Minister. There's been others who have, I think, not been critical of Keir Starmer, but they've tried to put distance between them and his decisions. You've had Cooper being blazing, for example, on the implication that Matthew Doyle may have been lined up for an ambassadorship. David Lammy leaked comments from Cabinet. There are people just very carefully distancing themselves, if not from Keir Starmer, the decisions that have been made.
And obviously in the short term, the local elections next Thursday are a key focal point going forward as to quite how bad that is for the Labour Party and whether that becomes the next sort of potential trigger.
We want to talk to you next about maternity because NHS England's chief midwife has admitted that the current state of care is not good enough. She did say, though, the NHS is still a safe place to have a baby. And this comes after statistics show the number of women dying during pregnancy or shortly afterwards is going up.
New clinical standards are being brought in, including more mental health assessments and actions on blood clots. Well, our health correspondent Laura Bundock spoke to Kate Brintworth, and she started by asking her why it's still such a problem in 2026.
None of us think that care is in the right place. We don't think that things are good enough, but we are starting to see improvements in safety with all the packages of care that we have put in.
What would you say to a pregnant woman right now who might have been watching the news, reading the headlines, and might feel very frightened about giving birth in an NHS hospital at the moment?
So I spend a lot of time visiting services all around the country, and the thing that unifies them is a sense of restlessness about what is happening in maternity. Every midwife, every obstetrician comes to work because they want a good outcome for the women in front of them. So yes, the NHS is a safe place to have a baby, and I would always urge women, talk to your midwife, talk to your doctor.
We've spoken to a lot of families who've lost babies, and they tell us how they are fighting multiple organisations just to get basic answers.
It's a terrible anguish to lose a child. I think it is one of the worst things that can happen to a human, and our responsibility as leaders in maternity is to make sure that those families do not experience that anguish. It's why we've asked services to look at their bereavement care in great detail, in huge detail, to make sure that families receive the care they need.
We've received recently hundreds and hundreds of emails from women saying a very similar thing, that when it comes to their midwife, they felt ignored.
Being listened to is the most important thing to every woman having a baby. She has the absolute right to be at the centre of her own care, to have her concerns taken seriously. For me, as a practising clinical midwife, if I don't listen to the woman in front of me, then I'm not doing my job properly.
Laura's here with us to discuss this a bit further. And Laura, there's more to come of your interview, but it's a very rare interview.
Yeah, it is, because, you know, we've been speaking, haven't we, for months about the crisis in maternity care at the moment. We've heard from those hundreds and hundreds of women and families who come forward sharing their stories, but it's really hard to get hold of anyone in any position of power or policy to talk about this. So it's unusual to hear from Kate Brentworth, who is essentially the most senior midwife in England, and the person who is responsible not just for the service but for the workforce at a time of really significant and serious crisis and scrutiny in this service. Look, she told me she's very aware of the strength of feeling of people and families who feel so badly let down, their anger, their frustration. And of course, these families have had to sit through inquiry after inquiry, failure after failure, so many secretaries of state all making these sorrowful admissions that things are going wrong, and yet we still know mistakes are being made with these tragic, tragic consequences in some cases, mothers and babies dying. And so she admits that we're not where we need to be right now, but she says she talks to a lot of staff in maternity who say they're not complacent, that there is this sense of restlessness among them to make change. She believes she is already starting to see small pieces of change. But I think for families, what she says is not landing well at the moment. I mean, I think they feel that these are false assurances from her. They're empty platitudes in many ways. They actually said to me, what we want to see is leadership, it's accountability, it's real evidence that fundamental change is on the way. And they said, for us, Kate Brentworth is providing none of these.
That's quite striking words, isn't it, Laura? Thank you very much indeed. I'm always aware when we do the stories of people listening who might be pregnant or, you know, about to give birth, and I really, it must be very difficult when these stories are in the news. I should also say, if you have been affected by some of the issues discussed with Laura just a few moments ago, if you've got a birth story of your own that you want to talk to us about, get in touch. You can email maternitystories@sky.uk.
Now, an update on the breaking news. A massive emergency response is underway in Denmark after two trains collided north of Copenhagen. And Oliver's here with all of the very latest on that.
Yes, so this accident happened just before 6:30 in the morning in Denmark, 5:30 UK time. And 4 people are in a critical condition. We know that 15 have been taken to a hospital in the Danish capital, Copenhagen. This accident's happening in Hillerød, which is to the north of Copenhagen, and it's 2 local trains that have collided head-on. It looks like they've collided right next to a level crossing, and luckily, with it being 6:30 in the morning, that train won't have been as busy as what it potentially could have been. We're hearing that in total 17 patients were discovered, and that there was quite a large response here. 50 firefighters have attended, 15 Fire vehicles have gone to 1 military helicopter and 7 ambulances. Now, we're just hearing from the Capital Region's emergency response team that their involvement in this, in terms of the emergency services, has now come to an end. This is seen as now being transferred over to the police, and a press conference that had been due to be held last hour has been delayed. That will now take place in roughly 5 or 6 minutes' time.
I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on that for us, Oliver, and please come back with any updates. Iranian state TV has broadcast dramatic footage of Iranian forces seizing foreign-flagged vessels in the Strait of Hormuz.
So they released these images after Iran targeted 3 more ships over the last 24 hours. You can see a speedboat pulling up next to a Liberian-flagged container ship, and then those armed men there, you can see the weapons on their backs, faces covered, climbing a ladder to take control of the ship.
Iran says it fired on 3 ships in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday and seized 2 after Donald Trump extended the ceasefire. Tensions remain high as the US maintains its blockade on Iranian ports, which has led to Tehran effectively closing the passage.
Well, our correspondent Sally Lockwood has the latest.
The ceasefire is holding, which is very welcome news, but the Strait of Hormuz has become a battleground, essentially, both sides trying to shape the narrative with their own videos. We saw US Central Command release their video at the weekend of US Marines seizing an Iranian tanker, and then this very dramatic footage from the Iranians showing the IRGC seizing a Greek-owned vessel and an Italian-owned vessel in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. A third one, it's also been confirmed, was attacked. Now, it's really interesting, very different styles. The US is much more operational. The Iranian is much more dramatic, set to music, with IRGC guards with their faces covered, carrying weapons. But both are designed to try and control the information space here. And all these incidents are staying below the threshold of open conflict while this ceasefire is in place. And of course, the bigger picture is that the Strait of Hormuz remains essentially paralysed, which is having such far-reaching consequences when it comes to the global economy. Now, the White House has said they do not think that yesterday's attacks by the Iranians on these 3 vessels constitute a violation of the ceasefire, but it's very interesting. I mean, we can see now that commercial shipping is not going to take these risks while this remains such a high-threat environment. And those small vessels that you saw in the video that the Iranians are using to attack ships, they've been using those for weeks now. We know that the Iranian Navy has been hammered, but these small attack boats that they've been using in the Strait of Hormuz remain very effective at keeping commercial shipping at a standstill, making it far too dangerous for them to try and pass the strait safely.
Sally Lockwood talking to us a little earlier there.
Now, Lebanon's Prime Minister has accused Israel of war crimes through the targeting of journalists after the death of one working in the south of the country.
Amal Khalil, who worked for Al Akbar, it's a left-leaning newspaper in Lebanon. It's known for its pro-Hezbollah stance. She sought shelter in a house from an Israeli strike together with a colleague. The house was then hit in a second strike, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. Emergency teams recovered Khalil's colleague, Zainab Faraj, alive with injuries and transferred her to hospital. The Health Ministry then added that a Lebanese Red Cross ambulance sent to evacuate casualties came under a stun grenade attack and live fire, at first preventing rescuers from reaching Khalil.
Well, Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said this: targeting journalists, obstructing access to them by relief teams and even targeting their locations again after these teams arrive constitutes war crimes. Israel's targeting of media workers in the south while they carry out their professional duties is no longer isolated incidents, but has become an established approach that we condemn and reject, as do all international laws and conventions. Well, Israel says it's investigating the strikes and denies targeting rescue efforts. Our international correspondent, Diana Megnay, has this update from Lebanon.
It brings to 9 the number of Lebanese journalists killed this year in this war. Amal Khalil, as you said, working for Al Akbar newspaper, she was in Israeli-occupied territory below what Israel now calls its yellow line, close to the town of Bin Jubail, as you said, a town called Al-Tiri. There's been very, very fierce fighting around there. And the details around the story are fairly complicated. The IDF denies that it fired on rescue teams, but that's certainly the story that we are hearing from the Lebanese Health Ministry, that after the vehicles that she was in and another vehicle in front of her, which was hit by an airstrike, 2 people in that vehicle killed. She and her colleague Zainab then took shelter in a house, and another airstrike was called upon that house. And then when rescue teams went in to try and dig her out of the rubble, Israeli forces threw a stun grenade and live fire to prevent them from doing so. So they were only able to extract Amal Khalil's body from the rubble a good 6 or 7 hours later. She had been able to make a call to colleagues, to her family, to say where she was, so they knew where she was. Israel has a drone in the air all the time. They know what is happening in that kind of territory, but they've made it very clear that anything that they deem an imminent threat, and I say that in inverted commas, really anybody who crosses that yellow line, they've essentially said is fair game. They've warned residents from going back to that area that Israel now occupies. They are razing the towns and villages that are there. They are engaging in very, very fierce fighting with Hezbollah there. And Amal Khalil was doing what a journalist should do, incredible bravery to go down there and try and document what was happening in her country. And I think, let's just be honest about this, Israel has targeted and killed other journalists. Just at the end of last March, they said they specifically targeted a journalist for Al-Manar that is Hezbollah affiliated, saying that he was part of the Hezbollah Radwan special forces. They killed 2 other journalists in that strike too. They have killed hundreds of journalists in Gaza. And they brought a whole crew of Israeli journalists into Israeli-occupied occupied territory just a few days ago to show them what was happening there. And she was trying to do the same from her side about her country. And this is what's happened to her. So there will be a protest today in Beirut, which we will go to, and then also her funeral a bit further in the south.
Diana Magnate there for us.
Now to another political story this morning. The government is expected to sign a new deal with France today to try and stop migrants crossing the Channel in small boats.
Hundreds of small police and military personnel will patrol French beaches. Let's go live now to Ali Bunkel. Ali, what's in this deal?
Well, the last one ran out at the end of March and it was extended by a couple of months whilst they renegotiated a new one, and they have come to an agreement. So this new deal, which will be signed by the Home Secretary, who is in northern France today, is worth £662 million over 3 years. It's an increase in money to the French police from the British government to give them the ability to have more resources to try and tackle the small boat crisis. So that, in terms of resources, will be more police, particularly police trained in riot situations, permanently deployed to the beaches of northern France, more surveillance equipment, including cameras, drones, and helicopters, and a greater ability to tackle what's known as the taxi boats. Now, these are boats that launch further up the coast. They then sort of traverse the shoreline and then pick up migrants before they make their journey over to Britain across the Channel. The number of migrants crossing has been increasing over the last few years, although this year, the first few months of this year, it is actually slightly down, although, of course, we are going into better weather, which is when the numbers really do start to tick up quite dramatically. And I think one of the one of the main points about this new agreement is it comes with this provision that if the French police are not doing enough in a year's time, then they could lose some of that funding.
Ali, whilst we got you, I just wanted to ask you a follow on a story I know you were looking at yesterday. We were covering the news that Lufthansa was cutting 20,000 or so flights this summer because of the increase in jet fuel costs, and then there was more to follow on that story later in the day from the EU. Give us your take on all of that.
Yeah, so I interviewed the EU Commissioner for Energy. The EU is trying to sort of get ahead of a potential crisis relating to fuel because of the ongoing war in the Middle East and the ongoing blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, particularly in the first instance aviation fuel. The EU gets around 40% of its aviation fuel from abroad, around half of that comes through the Strait of Hormuz. So we've already seen some airlines like, as you say, Lufthansa cancelling 20,000 flights. Other airlines have been levying surcharges on tickets in order to pay for the increased cost on fuel, and warnings that almost certainly it will affect summer holidays, either through flight cancellations or through more expensive tickets. We spoke as well yesterday to the head of Italy's Civil Aviation Authority, who recommended that people start thinking actually maybe about spending their summer holidays in their home countries, kind of like it was with COVID. So these are quite kind of bold, stark warnings ahead of the summer holiday season, because the expectation is that the crisis will continue. And the EU Commissioner was saying even if there was a negotiated peace deal tomorrow and the Strait of Hormuz open up tomorrow, because of the damage done to a lot of the fuel refineries and the production facilities in the Middle East, in the Gulf countries, this will take years. And so people should expect to have higher energy costs for a number of years still.
Really interesting, Ali, and well worth checking more of Ali's interview and reporting on this on the Sky News website.
Coming up, we are talking to a guest who I am very intrigued to hear from. He is the head of the Civil Servants Union. Given everything that's happening, it could be quite illuminating.